Alright, what is up folks? So over the course of this video, I'm going to cover the topic I think that's relatable to every single person that's going to be watching, especially if you're millennial or Gen Z, right? So a lot of people nowadays, they might be asking, they say that how come there are no more house parties? Well, the reason why there are no more house parties in 2025 is because no one can afford to buy a house anymore. It doesn't matter what the previous generation might say, right? The reality is that the vast majority of the people from the previous generation, every single person that wanted to work hard, every single person that wanted to purchase a home, every single person that wanted to get married, to raise a family, they could all afford to do so. But for the next generation, for millennials and Gen Zs and eventually Gen Alpha, this is simply not possible. I'm sure you guys have seen all these videos, all the Chinese university graduates, people with masters, people with PhDs, why none of them can find jobs, and how come everything is so expensive. I'll explain to you guys why. It's actually very, very simple, and it's even more obvious, ever since I've traveled to the countryside. Once again, I'm continuing this topic of, rise of mega cities versus life on the countryside. Let's say, if you look at one of these really, really shitty buildings behind me, I'm sorry to say, but it's falling apart. If you can see that in the distance, right? There's some trees there. So one of these empty units, most of them have been abandoned. All the people have left in countryside, if you have seen some of my previous videos. So you can probably rent one of those units for as little as 200 yuan. 200 yuan, that is $28 USD per month. That is as cheap as it gets, right? But here's the thing, right? If you live in a rural Chinese village like this one, there are no jobs here. I did mention before if you've seen my previous videos. So this entire village of, I don't know how many people exactly, maybe roughly 10,000 people, there's only 2 convenience stores left. There are no more schools. There used to be high school and middle school, kindergarten, daycare. They have all been closed down because all the young people have left. They have all moved into the city. See, this is a massive crisis. So I mean the rural Sichuan province. I mean the countryside. So, right, if you think about it, like 200 yuan, $28 per month. That is actually not expensive at all. Why are so many young people saying that everything has gotten so expensive? Well, here's the thing, right? There are no jobs here. If you want a good paying job, you have to move into the city. So let's say if you move to a big city nearby, if you move to Chongqing, which has 32 million people, yes, 32 million people, absolute insanity. What do you think happens when so many young people from all across the country, they all converge on this one big spot? There's going to be a massive housing shortage. That's why these apartments in these massive cities are so tiny, these micro apartments. So I know these buildings are old, but let's say, if you go to Chongqing, if you try to rent one of these apartments, let's say roughly the same size, right? The rent is not going to be 200 yuan. You're probably looking at 5,000 yuan per month. So that is about 25 times higher versus what you'll be paying here. See, this is the cost of, moving to these mega cities, because it's a supply and demand issue. If you move to the village, there's nobody here. Most of the homes have been empty or abandoned. So if you just pay a tiny bit of money, little as $28 US, you could rent one of these places for a month. But if you go to a big city, everybody wants to come to the big city. Everybody wants the high paying jobs. And that is the price you have to be willing to pay, right? And this is part of the reason why everything has gotten so expensive, because it's not expensive everywhere. The government has to step in and do something. You can not simply let these mega cities grow so fast and so big and just completely abandon the countryside, because if things were actually more even, because if more governments actually focus on developing the countryside, if there were programs to put into place, perhaps paying people massive bonuses to move to the countryside, the housing and the property market could be evened out, so there won't be a massive stress on the housing market in mega cities, and the government can create tens of thousands of jobs, possibly hundreds of thousands of jobs by tearing down all these old abandoned homes and putting up brand new apartments. And I'm sure many people will be willing to move in if there's actually opportunity here. If a company decided to open a subdivision here, if let's say the Chinese government actually invested more in opening up schools, let's say opening up more shops, opening up more karaoke bars or fitness gyms, so there's more opportunities for young people to talk and meet each other. The biggest issue with the countryside right now, I mentioned before, right, that there's no job opportunities and there's no youths. For example, if you're a single bachelor or bachelorette, if you move here, how are you supposed to meet other people, right? The average age of this village is probably, I would say, 70 to 75 years old. It's an extremely depressing scene, and it's a massive concern, because in another 10, 15, 20 years time, these villages, they won't exist anymore. Everybody would have died and passed away, and even the hospital here has long been abandoned, because all the doctors and nurses and the first responders, they have all left this godforsaken place place, they have all moved into the big city. There's another extremely important factor to consider. I know this firsthand because I did mention before I made a 20-minute video on this on life in the rural side of China. I grew up in a tiny suburb, in a tiny subdivision of roughly 30,000 people. The majority of the people in that subdivision nowadays is probably less. I would say there's probably 20,000 or 15,000 people left. So the majority of the people that lived in that subdivision, they all worked for the same hydroelectric company. It's part of China's state grid. If you can get into that company, you're set for life because that job in China is considered to be a 铁饭碗. What is 铁饭碗? It means it's a steel rice bowl. Basically, you have a guaranteed job security for life. So here's the thing, right? The reason why so many youths today, they cannot find any jobs is because life was too easy for the previous generation. I'm not saying everybody, but certainly because I grew up in such a small place, I know exactly where my dad and my mom and my uncles, their office were. And oftentimes they would take me to their workplace. My mom, my dad, and my uncles, my aunts, they never ever worked the 996 or 997. My mom, yes, for a brief period when she had her business, when she had her own very successful business. That was after she quit her job as an accountant. When my mom worked as an accountant at the hydroelectric company, their job was 40 hours work week. It was Monday to Friday. Typically, it's 8 to 4:30. Sometimes it could be 8 to 5. But I would say at least half of the time, most of the people sat around and did nothing. Oftentimes, people would take Fridays off. And some people would even take Fridays and Mondays off. They give themselves a 3-day work week and a 4-day weekend. The reason why they could afford so much time off was because there honestly wasn't so much to do. Oftentimes, when I visited my mom's workplace, I remember a bunch of people would just be sitting there and spinning around in their chair. Sometimes they would bring their own mahjong or their board game, or they would be playing cards. They would be smoking cigarettes and chewing on sunflower seeds and peanuts while they're at work. So the reason why their job was so easy way back in the day, you see, this was because, back in 1978, China decided to make a massive transformation, basically from communism towards capitalism. And what has happened is that obviously, let's say if you revisit China in the 60s and 70s, and basically, back in this time period, over 90% of the jobs, they were all blue-collar jobs. And, with the rise of technology and with the shift from communism to capitalism, and there was a massive rise in the white-collar jobs. And I think a lot of Chinese companies, along with the Chinese government, they just grossly overestimated the value of these white-collar workers, and there simply wasn't that much work to do. So when I was growing up, at the time, so the hydroelectric company, the part of China's state grid, I believe that across China's northern 3 provinces, they had upwards of 300,000 employees. Now the number has been cut dramatically. It's probably down to something like 100,000, possibly 150,000 people maximum, because many companies in China, along with the Chinese government, they have realized that there simply isn't that much work to do. We don't need to have this much white-collar workers. That's why so many youths are struggling to find jobs. And I'll give you guys a great example. You can compare it to in America, right? Remember when Twitter was losing so much money, right? Elon Musk came in, he bought Twitter, he turned it into X. He fired 80% of the staff, and the company is doing absolutely fine. So yeah, this is part of the reason why so many young people can't get jobs now. It's because more and more companies are waking up. They're realizing that half their employees are just sitting around and doing nothing. So we don't need to hire this many people. And one more factor I must mention, right? I did say that in this village there's virtually no jobs. Well, if you guys are walking around in this village, right? So there's this massive concrete mixer factory. When I first walked into the village, I thought, oh my God, this place is massive. It must be able to employ 1,000 to 2,000 people. I thought everybody in this village was employed by that factory. You see, that used to be the case. There used to be job opportunities for young people. The vast majority of the people, yes, they did used to work at the factory. What has happened in the last 30, 40 years is due to the rise of technology, due to the rise of automation, right? Almost every single job in that factory that used to be there, they have all been replaced by robots. It's very, very unfortunate, right? So everything in this world, is a double-edged sword. Everything has its consequences. A great example is that, think about, the rise of self-checkouts, right, at Walmart, right? Think about the rise of those kiosks at McDonald's. People now can take their own order, right? So here's the thing, right? That used to be a job for a McDonald's cashier, right? Yes, it might not pay much, but, those cashier jobs at McDonald's and Wendy's, they used to help many, 17, 18, 20-year-olds in order to make some extra cash, in order to pay their tuition and the living expenses for colleges and universities. But all of those cashiers, they have been replaced by these self-checkout counters. And it's the exact same thing in so many areas. Basically, at this concrete mixer factory, they have virtually no factory workers. The only thing as of right now in 2025 that cannot be replaced by the robots is those truck drivers that's driving these massive trucks full of concrete. This factory probably used to employ maybe 1,000 people, could be even more. Now there's probably only 50 or 60 of these truck drivers left, delivering all of these concrete to the factory and to other places around it, and that's it. So yeah, this is why so many young people are struggling, because the jobs that used to be there are simply not there anymore due to the rapid rise of technology. This is why I covered the concept of Fermi's paradox before, where Enrico Fermi talked about, if there are aliens out there in the universe, how come the aliens haven't visited us? I think it's possible that for every civilization that basically reaches a certain stage anywhere across this universe, they will inevitably reach this great filter, and this is at the point where the civilization simply cannot advance anymore. After it reaches this filter, everything will begin to move backwards, right? You think about technology, you think about the rise of iPhones, cameras, internet, computers, right? You think everything's been so great, but everything is a double-edged sword. And if you're living in the West, there's another great example. For example, let's say welders, right? I'm talking about manual hand welders. They used to make tons of money way back in the day, right? There's really good money in the trade, but nowadays I would say probably 80 to 90% of those welders, they have all lost their jobs in the past 20-30 years, because almost all the factories now, they all use the robots to weld. Because the robots, you can put 10 arms on the robot, they can work 24/7 non-stop. But if you're doing manual welding, you can only do so much. So yeah, so many jobs that used to be there due to the rapid rise of technology, and also due to the fact that the companies are realizing that there simply isn't that much work to be hiring this many people, right? And so a lot of companies worldwide, they have simply reduced their staff by 10, 20, 30, or even 50%. So yeah, young people are definitely going to be struggling for a very long time, and it's going to be extremely difficult to reverse this trend. And this topic is so important: the rise of technology, the rise of mega cities, and how it has completely drained the life out of the countryside. So I will keep coming back to this topic. So thank you guys so much for watching this video and staying all the way until the end, and I will see you guys next time.